committee before we to the joint committee. And without objection, I thought we'd, particularly in the interest of time, I thought we would take item 1 on consent and then continue item 2.
So moved.
Okay, so moved. Then we'll recess that meeting and go into the special joint meeting with the Audits and Governmental Efficiency Committee. And I thought we would take both items 3 and 4 together.
Sounds great.
Okay. Did you get that?
Yes. Item 3 is motion Han Garcetti, introduced on April 30th, proposing that Los Angeles World Airports be requested to report on the methodology and selection process used in determining which firm would be awarded the contract for project management of the capital improvement program at Los Angeles World Airports. And the motion also proposes that the City Ethics Commission with the City Attorney report back with recommendations to ensure that the process used to select and award personal service contracts at Lawa is adequately transparent and fair to all parties submitting proposals. And then item 4 is a verbal report by Lawa regarding the selection process for the award of the 3-year contract to Fentress Architects.
Thank you. I wanted to start. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I just want to start out just a couple of comments about where we've come and where we're going and why we're here. It was actually about 14 months ago that I really began to fight for something that I thought was extremely important to Los Angeles, and that's the modernization of LAX. I wanted to make sure that we were sending a very loud message to particularly the airline industry, that we were going to modernize, we were open for business, we wanted their business, and we wanted to be ready to accommodate that next generation of aircraft, and that meant building new gates. And LAX is the welcoming mat for the city. It's the first glimpse that people have of this city, and first impressions mean a lot. And we also know that the airline industry doesn't have to stop at LAX anymore. And we've heard the stories of them choosing routes which did not include LAX because just an uncertainty on whether or not we were serious about modernizing our airport. And there has been no significant progress at LAX since 1984 when we opened the Tom Bradley International Terminal. We know it needs to be modernized. It's outdated. It needs repair. Everyone is in agreement about that. And we know that since 9/11, we have not picked up the kind of business that other airports across this country have done. So no one wants to modernize this airport more than I do. Its ramifications are huge for our economy and everything about Los Angeles. But we need, and I will start out by saying, we were delighted with the choice of Gina Marie Lindsay as executive director of this airport, because I think you have gotten this idea about pushing forward with modernizing this airport. And it is a huge undertaking. And I know the commission knows that, you know that, and we all know it's a huge billion-dollar undertaking to modernize this airport. But we are here today because while that is true, that modernizing LAX is important, particularly to me and to a lot of stakeholders, we're here because there have been some stories, there have been some allegations, there have been some concerns raised on how we are awarding these contracts. And I, in my role as chair of this committee, and it's named, Commerce, Trade, and Tourism, I think for a very good reason, because it all means the same thing. It's all interrelated. But as my obligation as chair of this committee, I want to make sure that we look at some of these allegations. We look at some of these concerns that have been raised. I want to get this behind, as I know you do, because we need to move on to what the task is at hand, and that's modernizing this airport. But we're going to be awarding, millions of dollars in contracts as we move forward on this. And I want to make sure that we are protecting the public's interest. But I want to make sure we're protecting the airlines' interest, because it's the airlines that will be investing a lot of money in this modernization. I want to make sure we're protecting their interest as well, and making sure that there is absolutely no hint of impropriety or any wrongdoing on how we award these contracts. And I also want to make sure that everyone who wants to do business at Los Angeles, everybody that wants to do business at LAX, feels like they have a fair, open, transparent chance at being awarded some of these contracts in the future. I don't want in any way for us to be sending a message that the process is not fair, it's not open, it's not transparent. Everyone has an equal chance, if they are a good qualified company, to be awarded one of these contracts. So hopefully we will address these concerns this morning. I know you have a presentation. I know I have some questions as well, as I'm sure some of the other members of these committees do. And let's just make sure that we are all on board, we're all confident, we're all ready, to move forward. But, the end doesn't justify the means if we find out that there's any way we can improve the process. And I think maybe for me, it will be maybe just tightening up a little bit of the process of how we award these contracts, and hopefully you'll all be willing and able to give me some suggestions on how we might improve that.
Madam Chair, can I ask?
Yes.
I'm not privy to the allegations that were raised that generated this. Can you explain briefly the allegations?
Well, why don't we go through the presentation? We're here today because basically there was 2 contracts awarded, and both had some similar characteristics. An interview panel, after the first round of interview, picked one firm. The second round of interviews chose the other firm. So we're just here to find out how that happened, what went wrong. We understand there's some members of the panel that are here, and we'd like to ask you some questions as well. So we just want to see how the process went and make sure it was fair and open and transparent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Council members, we're delighted to be here this morning because we actually, I think, share your objective. We want you to be comfortable. We want you to be excited and totally confident with how we are moving ahead on this huge project. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about who's here this morning and what we'd like to cover in the agenda. To my left is our city attorney, Kelly Martin, and Walt Zifkin, one of our commissioners. And then behind me, we do have a raft of staff folks, all of whom were involved in one aspect or another of these selection processes. So we would like to answer any questions you've got, and we'll hope to provide you with an adequate base for discussion. Our agenda is that we'd like to cover the master plan implementation. Oh, I'm sorry. I need to tell you who I am. I'm Gina Marie Lindsay, Executive Director of the Los Angeles World Airports. We'd like to cover the master plan implementation, the contractor selection process, the architect selection process, and then the program manager selection process. But before we get into the specific slides, I would like to beg your indulgence and address something that I am suspicious may be on the front of your minds, since there has been quite a bit of press coverage about an audit on my old organization, the Port of Seattle. So if I could just give you a little bit of information about that. The Port of Seattle, I need to describe for you, is an independent port authority that is a combined modal port, seaport, airport, and a real estate economic division. Those 3 divisions report up through an executive director and to a board of commissioners that are elected county-wide. It has very wide latitude on how it conducts its procurement and contract management processes. The audit that has been referred to which I was not a part of. I had left the Port of Seattle by the time the audit was conducted, but some of the questions the state auditor has refers back to contracts that started while I was at the airport, so I'd like to address that specifically. But the general theme of the audit is a pretty vast disagreement between the Port of Seattle on what their latitude should be and the state auditor on what that latitude should be. And I think there have been the last several months, I understand, the port and the state are kind of wrangling with that issue. Should there be different changes and tighter, authorities and approvals and rigorous regulations on how the port conducts its procurement? And I think there are significant changes that the port is going to adopt. But it's important, I think, to understand that the difference is not that there were a bunch of employees running amok, doing things differently than what the port regulations and processes required. The real difference in opinion here is whether there should be as much latitude given to the Port of Seattle, and the state has a different view on that. Now, there are other things that come out of the audit as far as processes and contract management that I think will be very helpful to us as we set up our program, because there are always paperwork and administrative processes and checks and balances that I think we can always learn from. There was certainly question on a couple of the contracts that had started while I was at the port. And two that were cited in the newspaper were one that was an HNTB contract that was for the design of the third runway. And the allegation in the paper is that the contract started in 1993 and it lasted 4 years. And that is absolutely correct. It did, and it was always intended to do so. This was for design of a runway that was being litigated, 22 lawsuits over that project, being designed at the same time that the mitigation was being defined and the project was being adjusted. So when the procurement for that design contract went out, it was very clear that this was going to be a protracted job and that the scope of the job was going to have to be metered out in specific task orders as the project was changed to respond to the community interests and to the litigation. So that was anticipated. The second contract that was identified as being questionable in the newspaper reports is the program management contract with Parsons that started, I think, as a $10 million contract and then ballooned, as it was, I think, referred to 120-some million. When the RFP for that contract was issued, and it was a national search for the firm to do that work, the RFP clearly identified that this would be a 10-year program and that it would be annual renewals of that contract. And every time the contract was renewed, we went to the Board of Port Commissioners, got budget approval for that, and extended the contract for another year. So there was a significant amount of transparency in all this that was going on. But beyond that, I would be happy to answer any other questions. I am actually not definitively familiar with the audit because I have never been contacted. In the process that the state auditor was conducted to do this audit, nobody ever called me about it. I have been aware in the last several months that the audit was there, but to this day, nobody has talked to me about issues that were
And I don't know if we
raised.
want to ask questions about this now, or let's wait until, yeah, let's do that.
Fine. So we can move right into the
can move.
master plan implementation and the selection process,
Right.
if you like. Mm-hmm. Great. And I'm going to turn this over actually to Roger Johnson. We're going to do a little tag teaming here so that the people who actually know the most about the particular subject are the ones that are talking.
Good morning. Roger Johnson, Deputy Executive Director for Facilities and Environmental Planning at Lawa. What I'd like to do this morning is just kind of put this in context. As Ms. Hahn has said, we are about to embark on a significant program, and we will be spending tens and hundreds of millions of dollars. In fact, we will be spending billions of dollars.
Right.
So it is important that we do it right. But what I wanted to do this morning was provide a little bit of context on what we're doing, because I understand that some of you on the commission, or on this committee, know what we're doing because you've been meeting with us and overseeing this, but not everyone. So I'd like to start by going just a little bit of background, if I could. The figure that you see up there is the approved LAX master plan. Now, most of the elements of this plan have been entitled. They've been incorporated into the citywide general plan and in the LAX specific plan. There are a few elements: the North Airfield, the North Terminal Complex, where you see actually terminals 1, 2, and 3 on the north side have been removed in a pier-type terminal concept, and then far off to the right side of that is a ground transportation center. Those projects were put in the LAX specific plan as what was called yellow light projects. And in order to move forward on those projects, we have to do a specific plan amendment study. Now, that study is required both by the LAX specific plan as well as by the settlement agreement that we signed with the litigants over the master plan. That study is moving forward. In fact, we are having our first public scoping meeting tonight at 6 o'clock at the Proud Bird Restaurant on the EIR for the specific plan amendment study. The second one will be held this weekend also there. But what we are talking about right now is the continued implementation in a logical, cohesive manner of the LAX master plan. The South Airfield project was the first one that we did that was intended to improve the safety on the South Airfield. We are about 90% done on that. We are on schedule and we are on budget, and we hope to have the South Airfield completely reopened for business by the middle of June this year. So what we are proposing to do now is move forward on the implementation of the next projects as we're ready to move on the master plan. And the first one of those projects is a Crossfield Taxiway project. What you see here in blue is a proposed location. It comes off of the master plan for a new taxiway. The two aircraft that you see off the right on the Tom Bradley Terminal, that's to indicate the locations on the airport where we currently have gates that have been built to handle the Airbus 380 when it comes into town. So we are able right now to handle 380s when they start coming in, and we anticipate the first scheduled service of the Airbus 380 in about October of this year. So we can handle 2 Airbus 380s at the gates at one time right now.
You know, with all due respect,
You want me to move forward?
Yeah, I do, because
Okay.
I think we're at time, and we're really here to
Okay.
talk about 2 contracts.
Okay.
So we want to know what the process is.
Okay.
We have to be in council at 10, so.
Thank you very much, Councilwoman. As the Audits Committee as well, we're here today focusing on the contract
Okay.
and
Right.
to answer some questions to the public to make sure that we're transparent
Right.
in all proceedings in the city. And so this is more substantive. We don't need to go through this at this time. Thank
Okay.
you.
That's fine.
So why don't we jump through to the graphic that actually illustrates the steps that we
Right,
go through
right.
from an RFP
Right. I think that's what we wanna know.
The actual selection.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, great, Ross. Thank you. First step is to pull together an RFP, which really establishes the business rationale for why we want scope the project.
Right.
Identify the evaluation criteria.
Right.
It then goes to the Board of Airport Commissioners for review and approval. We then go forth and do our outreach. We put advertisements out. We put it on the network. We do a pre-proposal meeting where we unpack the whole thing, identify for folks what the process is going to be, and answer any questions. If there are any addenda that have to be issued at that point, then the city attorney reviews those and they go out. The proposals then subsequently come in and they go through an administrative review to determine whether all of the outreach criteria have been met for maybe Weeby DBE, whether the other city requirements, pass-fail requirements have been met. Then the selection panel, who is approved in the case of these 3 contracts, that selection panel was approved by me. And they sit down, evaluate the written submittals, then they interview the shortlist. Whether it's everybody or whether it's a short list really is
And on
determined by...
and on the Jim, the project manager contract, how many firms qualified for this, the
There were
written
5,
and the...
We will get into detail with that. There were 5. 2 were determined to be not eligible, and 3 went forward to be interviewed.
So 3. Okay.
Right. So the selection panel interviews, but generically, just the process here. The selection panel interviews. If they are happy with a selection, there is a clear winner, then they bring it to the executive director. The executive director then has 3 choices. I can say, fine, go forward, negotiate a contract, and we'll take it to the board when you have a contract. Or, no, I don't think you have enough information. I have continuing questions. You need to go back and do a second interview. Or I can just say, I don't think we like any of these. Throw them all out. Start again.
Is that policy or is that judgment?
You mean the process?
The 3 options that you have once a selection has been made. You outlined 3 options right now. that
Right.
You could do
Those are
once
the
the
options.
election.
That's a description of how the process works, because the charter gives the Kelly Martin, city attorney. The charter charges the executive director with the management responsibilities and duties to oversee the board's direction. The board's approved the board has approved the RFP and the process that's described. The executive director and every board report that goes to the board, every matter that the board votes on, not just RFPs, but everything within the airport, first goes to the executive director to have a board report and approval, or it doesn't go forward to the board. If the executive director doesn't think that any action that requires board approval, she has to say yes or no, or
Okay. But by simply the way this is structured, those are 3 options. You're just describing 3 options that exist, but it is not written in any place as a policy. It was a simple question.
well, it is it comes, where does the authority for that come from? It comes from the charter, it comes from the RFP, and it comes from the city and state laws regarding procurement. So you have to look at different places in all of those to see how that fits together. The puzzle fits together.
It was
There's
a very
not
simple
one
question,
place.
But it's not written anywhere that those 3
not
options
written in any one
exist.
place.
Okay.
So when the contractors are proposing going in, do they know that the executive director has these 3 options?
If they stepped back and analyzed it, they would. But do they think about it? I doubt it.
So it's not in the RFP. It's not one of the,
No, it's
doesn't describe
no,
the
it's
process.
not. We could clarify that in RFP.
Right. So the process for the contractors, is that described anywhere?
The selection process is described in the RFP. As I said,
Except for this?
well, this process also derives from the charter. So, and the process the board sets up for board approvals and board reports. So
Okay.
we could describe that more fully.
I
Yeah.
think that would be one recommendation. Okay.
If the executive director or the selection panel, and as you see up here, the selection panel itself can decide it needs more information and ask for a second interview. So a second interview can be triggered by either course. The selection panel saying we need more information, or the executive director saying I think we need more information.
Who sits on the selection panel?
There were 5 people on both of these selection panels, and I appointed those folks.
Are the airport
Yes,
employees?
they are airport employees. We also, in both of these selections, and we will unpack each one of these selections and tell you exactly who was on and who were the outside people. The outside people were observers. They were non-voting members, but it's helpful to get some outside perspective.
Can I just say, not all selection panels necessarily have airport employees. The city attorney's office has said that in order to vote, you have to be a city employee. But Lawa has in other procurements. For example, recently we had one where Tom Connors, the former head of the transportation department for the city of Los Angeles, a retiree, came back under the 90-day permission rule under the charter and sat on and served. So every one of these has Lawa employees. Who sits on it depends upon what the skill set is needed to do the evaluation. In IT, it's IT people. In transportation, it's transportation people. Here, this is a senior procurement. It's senior executives.
And do they fill out ethics forms so there's no conflict of interest?
Yes.
Non-city people fill out ethics forms. The city employees fill out ethics forms under the rules that prescribe their disclosure. So if they're high-level filers, they fill out the forms that are high-level filers fill out. It depends on their job level what they fill out.
Okay, so I'd like to get to unpacking, as you
Okay.
describe it, of both of these contracts.
All right.
Let's do the unpacking of Dim Jim.
All right, Jim Ritchie. Well, let's see. Do we want to go through?
Yeah, I think
Yeah, let's go through your. Yeah, jump to your stuff.
Jim or
Let's do Dim Jim first.
Good morning, Jim Ritchie, LAX Development Program, and I should introduce myself by saying that my department is responsible for the administrative procedures that I'll describe to you. Apologize, we were anticipating architectural, but it's just as easy to jump to the program management. Actually, I'd like to show this slide first. Show this one.
Well,
This is-
with the select, was the process pretty similar for both of them, right?
Exactly the
Exactly.
same.
So
The
you
only
can
thing
kind of
you'll
talk
see-
about both of them.
You'll see the dates will change.
Right,
You'll see the
okay.
names will
So you
change,
can-
but I'll be repetitive on the process.
And they-
This slide very quickly shows during the time frame starting in the fall, we took the city's goals, our goals, to deliver Airbus A380 gates by 3 RFPs. They came in the same time. These were the 3 components. I'll talk about program management. I'll first show you those timelines. Next, please. These are the fundamental timelines. You see, we started with the RFP for BOAC. We moved down those predetermined processes. We had the pre-proposal conference. We had interviews. We had 2 interviews. We concluded and awarded a contract on the 3rd of March.
And this is the same that's in our packet, correct?
Exactly. You have a copy.
All right, well, okay.
Evaluation criteria, very quickly, you'll see there's no single criteria. Strong emphasis on program manager. Next. The selection panel was comprised of all senior Lawa employees. You can see the experience that these individuals had. I was certainly on that panel. Non-voting members, we had 2 former airline representatives, ones that had been involved as owners' reps at Atlanta's Hartfield Airport. I should comment that the non-voting members, they were non-voting due to the fact only Lawa employees or city employees can be voting members on that slide.
But did they give input?
Oh, yes.
But they just didn't vote. But
Exactly.
they gave
They
input.
were very valuable in that
And
regard.
this was like after the interviews, you all sat around
Exactly.
and talked about it, and they gave input.
Exactly.
Okay.
Key component throughout this whole process, we had city attorney representative sitting side by side with us throughout the process. Administratively, the due diligence was done by my department and the contracts administration department. I'll ask Mr. Martin to describe the summation of our thinking in the selection that concluded as it did.
Okay. You guys are making me crazy jumping around like this.
And
I won't move, I promise.
I think the one issue that's most is there was a 1 interview and then there was a
Right.
second
I think
interview.
that's what we want to talk about.
Okay. I'm Steve Martin. I'm the Chief Operating
You
Officer.
guys trying to
of Lawa.
distract us. You're
I promise I won't move. This describes the stages of interview and selection process, and I want to just clarify exactly how it was done so that everything is communicated properly, because what we've read in the papers doesn't communicate it
Okay.
properly. Sorry, get it closer. Thank you. That's what the city attorney is good at. The 2 elements in this first stage, in the first part, there's 5 firms that applied, and 2 of them were weeded out just on simple non-qualifications.
Okay.
HBMG and Marina Point were
Okay.
not technically qualified to do the
Okay.
work. That's done as an administrative matter. In the evaluation round, the second panel up there, there's 2 parts to that. There's a scoring of the written proposals,
right.
and there is a scoring separately of an oral interview of each of the firms that came in.
Okay.
And there were 3 firms that
So
came
when
in.
we read about the scores in the paper, was that on the written or the oral?
You were getting a slice as I read the paper, and I'm not sure if I've read all the articles, but the articles I read were reporting just the scoring of the interviews, not the scoring of the
So
written.
did you had written
Yes.
scores for the written
Yes.
report?
Yes, separate scoring for written, and it's also described as voting in the paper, and it's really scoring in the paper. It is a sheet that assigns points to each of the evaluation criteria that Mr. Ritchie showed up there, and each panelist fills out a scorecard, puts down points for individual criteria. You add your own scores up,
Right.
give it to the city attorney. The
Right.
city attorney adds up the scores of all the panelists, and then at that time you know what the rankings or results are. But that second panel up there is a combined result of the scoring on the written reports and on separately on the first interview. As a result of that scoring assembly, the city attorney basically decides how people are ranked. The RFP contemplated a second interview. It said in the RFP that we may have another interview. During the deliberations that led to the scoring in that round, the panel, myself included, felt that we did not have enough facts to render this big of a decision, and we started saying we would like to have a second interview.
Okay, and as just an observer, it was like a 30-page written.
I think it was longer than
Okay,
that.
longer. Okay, that, and it was how many hours were you in there interviewing them?
For each proposer, we allowed them to make a 30-minute presentation, and we had a
Right.
1-hour interview after that.
Right.
The 30-minute presentation just...
Okay, so someone like me would say, what possible information did you not get the first time around? That seemed like a lot of information.
Yep.
What were you feeling that you had not gotten good information on? And was that a result of what we were asking? You know, they always say you only get back what you've asked.
Right.
So were we not asking the right questions? Was our RFP not bringing forth the right criteria? I mean, what possible information did you not get after more than 30 pages and this extensive interview process, oral interview process?
I think two things. One is the presentations made by the firms are largely marketing presentations, how they are going to, what their qualifications are. And in fact, a lot of cases you have two firms, one after the other, claiming qualifications in the same location where work had been done. So in an airport X, firm A would say, we did that work. Firm B would say, we did that work. And you kind of drill into it and say, well, what work did you do there? But I don't think we felt like we had enough time in a 1-hour interview after the proposals with each of these firms to really get into the meat of it.
And why did you limit yourself to an hour?
Well, I've been through a lot of proposals in prior jobs and as a consultant for years, and that's generally the kind of 1-hour interview, and if you need more, you come back and do it again. There are a lot of places where you do second interviews, and we contemplated it here. So we were not, at the time, actually troubled at all about the appearances or the whatever about doing a second interview. We understood, I can tell you, we understood the weight of the decision that we're making and the importance of this selection. And spending another hour and a half with a second round of interview didn't seem like a big deal to us. It didn't seem like, well, this is going to, create controversy. It was, well, let's just be more diligent, bring them back in. It's not a waste of our time.
Okay, if it very clearly set out the option for a second interview, why did we read, Madam City Attorney, that they were forced to take a vote after the first round of interviews? They had to choose who was number one and who was number two, if it perfectly laid out that there was an opportunity for a second interview, and that was not unusual.
There are ranking sheets that are filled out at each stage of the process. Our job is this, and there was a letter that went out from Mr. Ritchie by his group to all of the people participating in the process that was very detailed as to what they were going to do. Because we had...
Get to the mic a little more.
I'm sorry. Because we had... I can do it for him, but not for me. Because we had the... two outside representatives, it was felt, and we wanted to make sure that they understood the process and the time commitment involved and what would happen. There was a very detailed letter that went out. Once that letter goes out, our job as the city attorney's office is to make sure that that Lawa follows the process it describes in writing and commits to. So having described that process in that...
Everybody knew that they would be ranked after the first round.
I'm not sure that everybody who was, I'm not sure what the participants who were being interviewed knew, but everybody at Lawa knew it. And once Lawa decides that that's what Lawa's going to do, our job is to make sure that Lawa follows the rules as they go. Because
but you can see this is what everyone is concerned about. This is what doesn't look good. First round, score sheets, all pointed to Bechtel.
Well, no.
Can I correct that?
And, okay, well, according to what we read, I'm just
Well,
telling you what we
I'm
read.
sorry, but I
Yeah.
can't explain to you why something gets into the
Okay,
newspaper.
that's what we're asking. That's why we're
not-
here today. And then the second round, which sounds like it was totally normal and everybody expected it, all of a sudden it flipped to the other firm. That's why we're here.
Well, the first step. Again, there's 3 evaluations that happened here. The first
Right.
evaluation was the written.
Right.
The second evaluation was the first interview, and the
Right.
third evaluation was the third interview.
Right, but after the written and the oral, the first time, what we read was they had to choose who they ranked number 1. And 4
Each evaluation,
or all 5
each
ranked.
evaluation has a form that's filled out by each of the evaluators.
Right.
It gets tabulated. The written was actually not tabulated by our office. It was tabulated by Mr. Ritchie's group. The second one was tabulated by our office, and the third one was tabulated by our office. Each one of those was based on what came before. At that time, you start afresh.
But explain to us the ranking after the first and second, the written and the oral. That's what we want to know.
Right.
How did the ranking, according to what we've read,
Right.
go to Bechtel after those first 2?
Well, just to be clear,
Okay,
on the written scoring,
right.
Dim Jim was ranked number 1.
Okay,
Okay?
good to know.
We did not
Good
know
information.
that at the time. We just fill out forms. We don't know what the ranking is. I only knew what my point score was, but Dim Jim was number 1 after the written. On the interview, on a standalone basis, a slice, the first interview, Bechtel was ranked number 1. The only thing the panel agreed on was that Parsons Jacobs, the third firm, was ranked number 3 on both counts. So there was, both in the discussion about, gee, we don't have enough information, maybe we should
Right.
have a second interview, and in the scoring, the written and the interview, we had different results. I'll also add that the 2 airline observers, in their experience with these parties at other airports, were divided in their views about
Right.
which was more qualified.
Right.
So,
So what brought you to that, if I have to vote and rank these firms 1 and 2, what made you vote for Bechtel as 1 after the
Well,
written and the oral?
just to be clear, and I'm not trying to, we don't vote, we just put down points, and we don't know what the result is when we do it because we're doing it independently. We don't get together as a group.
So there was no taking of a vote.
We just fill out a scorecard.
They score
The
it.
scores are given to
So
the
that
city attorney.
that
Right.
report that said the
Right.
city attorney said you have to take a vote
Right.
and rank these 1 or 2 never happened.
Never happened.
They fill out a scorecard.
Yeah. And we asked the city attorney if we could have a second interview before we filled out the scorecards and after we filled out the scorecards. But we did not know what the result was. There wasn't a vote of people saying it's 4-1.
But the
Or-
first interview was between 3 firms or Jim and Bechtel?
In the first interview, the written evaluation and the first interview were 3 firms, and everybody agreed who was number 3. The second interview was for the 2 firms where there was flipping, flopping between the written and the verbal.
So by the time we had that second interview, the first interview where people say that Bechtel was number 1, there were 3 firms.
Yes,
And then there was a second interview where our general manager sat in,
right.
and the one that's in question, there was only 2 firms being evaluated,
Right,
not
because,
3.
because nobody had Parsons Jacobs, the third firm, ranked anything but 3 on any of the criteria, as far as I could tell.
And
So-
in that first hearing, as you're scoring, and we've all sat on panels
Yeah.
where you just write down your little number and you never know until the end.
Yeah.
At that second hearing, or excuse me, first hearing, did you know at that time, did the city attorney tally them and come back in and say,
No.
there's 2 questions here, say, here's who it is? They did not.
No,
Okay.
I gave my ballot to Brian Osler, who's city attorney, and I left the room, and other people were still scoring.
And in that first meeting, in the first discussion, first interview, was there discussion of potentially having a second interview?
Yes.
Well, let me be clear on that. Steve, and I wasn't in the room at that point, but as I understand what happened, Steve scored, everybody else scored. The group then convened later that evening to talk about, and the city attorney told them, well, here's what it all added up to. So there was a meeting where the group got to reconvened again, but it only happened after.
But when
they
I
filled in the
handed in my
forms.
scorecard, I think is what you're asking. When I handed my scorecard, I had no idea whether we were going to be doing a second interview or not. I asked for one. I handed in my scorecard.
So when you hand it, so there's just a little bit of understand this. So when the meeting the first meeting concluded,
Yep.
And the scores were given to the city attorney's office, then you left.
Yep.
And then there's a later discussion. Did the request for a second hearing concept come in the scoring meeting, that first one?
Yes.
Or the second one?
In the first,
The
both.
first one.
I mean, both.
Both, right.
Yeah.
But if the first discussion happened in that first meeting.
Yes.
When you were scoring.
Because we were-
Kind of saying, we're not 100% sure, we're going to
I mean-
score because we're required to today, but we think that probably would be useful to have a second hearing.
Right. Not, on specific things, like, we're not sure this fact is accurate. There's something that we need to know the answer to, and we don't know the answer to, and we feel like we're scoring things without full information. And we really wanted, I personally wanted to ask more questions, and the time limits and the back-to-back interviews did not let us challenge these
The
proposers
perception-
like we'd like to.
The perception is, which I think Ms. Hahn alluded to, is that there, that you all agreed and there was no request for a second, and then it came later on that there should be a second hearing after, and it.
No, I heard that there was a request from the panel for a second interview. What I think we're still trying to get at is, the scores. Did the scores add up to? Is that how the rankings got 1 and 2? Was it because of the scorecards?
Yes. The scorecards are added up, and the written result had.
There was never a question that said if you had to rank these firms 1 or 2.
No,
that
there
never.
was. Just assigned points, 20 points for this, 10 points for that, and there was never and declare somebody number 1 and declare somebody number 2.
Okay, so let's. I'll ask us if you have some questions. Let's go to the second round.
Yeah.
Before we go to second round.
Okay.
Let me ask a question. Was this process used in the past, or was this the first time this type of process was used when you're going out for bid on a vendor?
Kelly will have to answer that because
This is our process where we have these
This
score
is an
sheets.
established process.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think the question is to have a second panel like this, to get to that end, or do you usually stop after that initial?
What we usually do is preserve flexibility in our RFP to go to the second interview if we think it's necessary. Sometimes at Lawa, we get one bidder. Sometimes we get 20 bidders.
How many times has the second interview panel been triggered?
Convened?
So this was
Well,
not
on a-
out of the ordinary.
On a percentage basis, what do you say, over 50%? 70%?
I would say at least 50%.
You gotta come on the microphone, please.
All right,
Give them more chairs.
I'm sorry. I don't feel comfortable giving you an exact percentage, but I can tell you that my perception would be at least 50% of the time. I can tell you, similar to Mr. Martin, I started my career with Lawa as a consultant over 20 years ago, and under a professional services contract, we had 3 rounds of interviews, and this was in 1987.
And you felt the same way. After the first round, you did not have enough information.
Well, I was actually a consultant at the time, and they kept bringing us back to ask us more questions.
No, on this
yeah.
one. On
Oh,
this
I'm
one.
sorry. Absolutely. Yeah.
We really don't have that much time to go back to your whole career,
On that first
Roger.
one, I thought they had all the information they needed after the first round on the one in 87.
Yeah,
but,
no, we don't have enough time to do that one.
On this one, absolutely agree with Mr. Martin. In fact, what I would say, if anybody said who won, the question was really who lost. There was not any comfort on the part of anybody on the selection panel on moving forward with a contract with the responsibility of what we're trying to do to move forward without getting some more information.
So you all asked for the second interview.
Absolutely.
And
yes.
on this point, though, it's not written policy on your contracting procedures to say if the panel so chooses or at the discretion of the general manager, or is that written
Yes,
policy?
it is written.
It's written
written.
into the RFP,
It is written in
absolutely.
policy.
I
Okay,
have-
so people could expect that in the event.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The RFP says here, the proposer selected to be interviewed will be notified in writing at least 7 calendar days prior to the scheduled interviewers. The proposers may be subsequently re-interviewed for final evaluation. That's within the RFP. So it was contemplated that there would be the possibility of having more than one interview. Yes.
If I could ask Steve Martin a question just based on that. Steve, you've been around this 25 years, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
You've gone through a lot of these different processes.
On both sides of the table.
Okay. And when we finished the first round, the written said one thing and the scorecard said another. Is that what I'm hearing?
The written scorecard said one thing, and the interview scorecard said another.
Okay. And what was the difference between the two in numbers or in quality of where it was, and why did that make you say, well, let's do another one and really clarify it?
I would say the biggest issue that I would identify, I mean, just in terms of what we care about here,
Yeah.
the biggest issue that we're trying to drill into is we've decided to use something called an integrated program
Right.
management team here, which is unusual.
Right.
It is not something that is common, and it reflects the goal of trying to take the city employees, engineers, and others at the airport and kind of commingle them, if you will, with this outside consultant to deliver the project, rather than just farm it off to an outside party and say, call me when it's done. And we really wanted to drill into and didn't feel like we were getting good answers about how each of these firms was going to execute that program, which is not easy to do in this system. Other airports, maybe it's easier because the civil service rules aren't as difficult. Most airports don't try to do this because it's too difficult.
At what point did you request a second interview? I think we were trying during that first time when you were scoring, or the evening when you all got back together.
When we got done with the panels that day,
That
and
day.
we were about to fill out our scorecards, we were all saying, gee, let's validate the facts, and we didn't feel like we had enough
And at
facts.
that point,
we
did you
said,
tell the executive director?
No, we told the city attorney who was in the room, we think we'd like to have a second interview, and the city attorney, wasn't Kelly, who was in the room, basically said, fill out your scorecards and we'll just basically discuss it afterwards. Get the scoring done. That's what the process calls for. Yes, I understand your request. We will deal with it after, and it was dealt with after.
Did you know who won at that point?
No, I did not.
No, individual committee panel members did not know.
No. I did not know, and I was on the panel.
But you know both these firms to start.
So when
Yes,
when did the executive director learn of your request for a second interview?
I don't know. I mean, I think it was the city attorney's office that talked to the executive director. It wasn't me. So,
It was later that afternoon.
yeah.
On the microphone, please.
Yeah, might as well get another chair.
I believe it was late that afternoon.
Rude.
Kelly and I were talking about it, and it was clear that the panel indicated they were not peaceful with being finished with the process, that they wanted a second interview, and I 100% supported
them.
that. Absolutely.
Why did you choose to sit in on the second interview?
Because this is going to be a very, very important contract. It's a very important set of services that I am going to have to stand in front of for the Board of Airport Commissioners, for you, for the City Council, and for the Mayor.
And if that is
I
true,
needed to
if that is
understand.
true, why weren't you in on the first round?
Well, I'll tell you the truth. I really didn't want to spend the time evaluating all the written proposals and sitting through all the interviews. And if it had been a slam dunk, if it had been a very easy thing with the selection panel that was very clear that they were peaceful, there was a single choice that was right, I wouldn't have needed to sit in. But if we've got 5 very smart, experienced people that are sitting there working through written proposals and listening to oral interviews and still feeling very conflicted, you bet I'm going to sit in as an observer and try to pick up the dynamics myself.
Tell me about the makeup of the panel the second time around, as well as the makeup of the team that came the second time around. They were different.
Yes, they were. Well, the selection panel was not different.
Except for the airline executives.
The airline representatives were not there.
That makes it different.
Well, yes. I guess that's correct.
Right.
They were never voting members.
But they were,
and
as
they
we
did
were
not
heard before, they gave input and they had a perspective.
That's right.
That was not there the second time around.
And that's right.
And why weren't they there the second time around?
Well, they were from their corporate offices. They had left town, couldn't be back. And we did not consider it to be of material import. The questions that we wanted to delve down into, and now I'm speaking a little bit for the panel, and I shouldn't, but go ahead.
I mean, the two airline individuals, one from Delta, one from American, left us with their questions. When we were having that discussion before we did our scores after that first interview, they left us with, I got a question about this, I got a question about that. We knew what their questions were. We had just spent an entire day listening to people sell us their wares, and we knew what the questions were. Those airline folks had experience with these firms elsewhere and said, you know, what they're telling you about this airport isn't exactly right. You should ask a question about that airport. And there were cases where they just said, here's something you should check on. It was almost adding to the reference check kind of environment that we were doing.
And what about the team? How did that change on the second round?
In the first round, each proposer, the 3 proposers in the first round, were limited to 8 people, and all of them brought 8 people. And in a rehearsed presentation with every individual popping up and sitting down, as you're getting here.
Sort of like you guys.
You get that interview. In the second round, we said, bring the 3 people that you are going to assign to this project and who are going to be here in Los Angeles doing the work next to us. Do not bring the 8th person who is a salesperson on the margin. Bring the 3 people we're going to have to live with. And they were allowed only 5 minutes of presentation just to restate their quals. And then we talked to them for well over an hour. I think it was 90 minutes. And it was an interview like a job interview. It was an interview. It's like, what about this? What about that? What would you do in this circumstance? What would you do in that circumstance? It was the kind of interview you'd like to have if you were hiring somebody as an employee. And in some ways, because of this integrated program management team where they're going to commingle with our employees, that is what we're trying to get at. And it was a really tough interview. I personally asked very harsh questions, having been a consultant for years and knowing that not everything that you hear from a consultant is always accurate. Wanting to drill behind that and say, what really happened? I know what happened in that city. Why don't you tell me what really happened in that city? Why did that job go bad? And what did you do about it?
So you got the information you needed
Yes.
from the second round?
Yes.
I'm assuming the other panelists did as well.
I won't speak for all of them, but I think we were all much more satisfied with the second interview than the first interview. Even if we had the second interview format in the first interview and said you can't even do any presentation for 30 minutes with your 8 people, it might have been a better way to do things.
Were you the chair of the panel?
No, Jim Ritchie was.
Jim Ritchie was the panel.
Yeah, I've been nominated because I have the...
Oh, so you were nominated to speak today.
Well, because I have the highest number of years.
I think the other panelists are here. We can certainly...
Yes.
And they're all here.
Should.
We brought them all here, but I'm the one with 25
Okay, let me
years,
just
so.
ask you, integrated management team, which is what you're saying is unique and special, the bureaucracy of the airport and the team coming in and your experience. Now, you know both Bechtel and Dim Jim
Yes.
like the back of your hand, right? I mean,
I know-
you dealt
I
with
know
them
both of them well. I know
Okay,
both.
and you have 25 years in this business.
Yep.
So when you were parsing it out in your mind from interview 1 to interview 2, your concern was, how does it work for Lawa here? How does it work in this region here? I mean, we want this modernization to happen. So those kind of brain conversations you had with yourself suggested the second interview would flesh out those points.
Yes. And for example, someone can come in the first interview and say, I'll do you want an integrated program management team? I'll do it. Second interview is, how are you going to do it when you run into this problem with consultants supervising city employees? How are you going to deal with it, and where have you dealt with it? And if the answer is, I've never dealt with it, that's not a really good answer.
That's the other panel.
Ms. Hahn, may
Yes,
I ask
yeah.
a question? Mr. Zifkin, I apologize for being late, Ms. Hahn. You have a long history of interaction with the city of Los Angeles. Do you feel there was anything out of line here at all? Do you feel there's anything that should cause alarm? Or is this just a very tough, competitive contract that at the end of the game, they say if we had called this, maybe that would have happened?
I do not see anything at all out of line here. And I will tell you that what you wind up with is 2 highly competent companies, highly competitive companies. I respect the staff for the process they went through. I respect the staff for not jumping into a contract that I think the first award of for 1 year was $28 million, I think,
Oh, it's
up
20.
to
It's
20.
already up. I thought it was 25.
12, maybe it's 25 or $28 million.
Change order already?
And if they're successful, we will have additional awards to them. So this is the task that they are called upon to do is very serious. The financial commitment by Lawa to them is very serious. So this process, I think, was a good process. And let me add while I'm on, I would never want anything, let alone anything of this moment, but anything coming to the Board of Airport Commissioners for approval that the executive director was not aware of and did not approve of. Because we are assuming that as the executive director, when a staff report comes to us, it bears her imprimatur. So
you had a feeling that she was supportive of the contract being awarded?
But what could I just finish my questions on that? I just wanted from the commission what you just stated.
Yeah,
I understand that, though, but also what you stated, too, that an executive director, whether it's in another city department or an agency, does review what the staff does. That's what you have an executive director for. This is not something that we just kind of throw up on the wall and say, this is where we end up. Two great companies that have built much of America and now much of the world were very competitive in this process. There was a story written that may or may not have all the facts right. I don't know. But this
But we're
hearing,
getting that today.
I understand that. But this commissioner, who's appointed by the mayor and approved by the city council, is stating that this process was done as he saw fit and within the purview of what our mission is to get things done at the airport to serve the people of Los Angeles. So that's what I wanted to make sure the commission, because it's outside, not the day-to-day operation. But when I look into the day-to-day operations, I get a feel that everybody's anxious here. I just want to make sure that the commissioner, stated that for the record so that the general manager knows that that's the process. And that makes me feel comfortable, because I want people to work in this city to get things done and to do it right and legally. So I thank you. And I know, how long was your commission yesterday?
The commission,
Monday.
pardon me?
Monday, excuse me.
Monday.
The commission meeting Monday was from 1:30 to 4:30.
Right.
When
You went overall.
when these projects were coming up, it was even longer. I mean, there was a lot of time and study put into this. But I reiterate, you've got it exactly right.
Right.
This was the correct process.
And I've never seen, Ms. Hahn, in my 34 years of anything so complete as a report like this, which I've thumbed through. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Did the commission, did you ask for any, I know you're pretty much saying that you thought the process worked well. Did the commission ask for any of the scoring sheets or ask for any backup information? Was that of concern to you on how they were ranked?
When this first came up, and you'll correct me if my recollection is wrong, but I think when this first came up, we did not ask for the scoring sheets. We understood the process, we understood the interviews, we understood the recommendation, we knew who the panel members were, and we did not ask for the scoring sheets. I think
Why did two of the commissioners abstain from the Fentress contract?
two commissioners abstained on the Fentress contract, and the Commissioner Velasco was not present for a good part of the discussion on Fentress and chose to abstain, I believe, for that reason. You'd have to ask her. I think that's what she said. And Commissioner Patsoris abstained because I think she had some concerns about there not being written notes by the panel members, and so she abstained. I think that's why she abstained. And, well, if you don't mind, I don't want to impose, I will say that with Fentress also, you had two highly qualified, internationally recognized firms. And I believe the selection of Fentress, I voted for it, and I believe it was absolutely the right selection for the job that we have to do.
Were you in any way concerned, though, that the first round had picked another firm?
No, I wasn't concerned because these are very difficult judgment calls between two highly qualified firms, and I would want there to be thought and consideration and taking a beat and thinking about it, and people have a right to maybe change their mind or the presentation changes in the second round. So I would be concerned about getting involved with an architect with millions upon millions of dollars going to this architect, and somebody met with him for an hour and a half, and we selected an architect that was going to, now there was, and by the way, in the first round with Fentress, by the way, and the commission did not approve the architect the first time it came up because there were commission questions, including some from me, wanting to see more information, wanting to see more of Fentress's design before we approved Fentress. So there was a second commission meeting to go through the Fentress award.
Okay.
Madam Chair, if I could ask this question. When we're looking at two big firms like this, and you go through a two-tier process or an interview and another interview, what discretionary authority, responsibility does the executive director have when you get into a situation where, you know, I mean, how many pins on an angel or an angel on a pin or whatever, when you start parsing it out and you talk about an integrated management team and the uniqueness of Lawa. Look, nothing's been done there for 25 years, okay? There's reasons for that. And so now we're trying to jumpstart it and kick it and get it going. Doesn't the executive director, when it gets down to something like that, shouldn't that executive director bite the bullet within the responsibility of the authority and make a decision on this? Regardless if people like it or not, somebody has to have the buck stop if, in fact, the criteria is clear, the verbal is done, the written is done, and you're into one of these situations. Isn't that part of the law and the legal opportunity for the executive director to make those decisions?
Absolutely. As Councilwoman Hahn said at the start of this process, everybody has a role to play.
Okay.
Your role was to ask questions.
Right.
My role as the city attorney is to make sure that even if people are kind of uncomfortable with it, that they follow the process they said they were going to and fill in the forms. The commission's role is if they don't have, if they're not comfortable the first time it gets brought to them, that they send it back and spend more time with it. And the executive director's role, and the individual person sitting on the panel's role is to fill in those forms to the best of their ability. And the executive director's role is to step back and dig down and meet with the people and ask everybody the questions. Why did you do it? Was it true to the RFP? Did it make sense? Are you comfortable with it? Is this the right thing? And she is supposed to take back her business judgment and her understanding of the people and the process and say, at the end of the day, does she feel comfortable? Can she sleep nights voting on it? The charter gives her that responsibility.
Right.
We all have our roles to play, and we are all supposed to play them, and that's good. And it all gets described in the public. This was all described in the board report. The information is available to the public. The process, the Supreme Court of the state of California said that
we get that. We get that. We get that. But let me ask one question here. There's a process, something happened in this process where there was ambiguity. At some point, there was a decision to get a second panel. Now, in your opinion, do you think we should clarify that for future contracting procedures such that we say you're only going to have so many shots at this for interviews, or do we leave it open so that, you know, there may or may not be another panel?
I think that we should.
Let me just say, too, I think that's really it, too. And I think everything you've described has been by the book, the charter. It is our process. Our executive director absolutely has these three choices after the information is given to her. But I think you've got to admit that on some level, this just didn't look good. And I think that's what we would like to, in the future, clarify a little bit, so that if it indeed is by the charter, is indeed her authority, we make it so it is a little more transparent. The idea of triggering the second round of interviews, is that just because the panel was uncomfortable? We didn't really have enough information. What's to prevent a panel in the future from just being uncomfortable? Somebody made them feel uncomfortable. That's what I would like to see, and maybe, and I've talked to Jean Marie about maybe coming back with, and the city attorney and the controller's office, coming back with maybe some specific triggers for that second interview. If these things happen, there will be a second round of interviews, and kind of take it out of just somebody was uncomfortable, there wasn't quite enough information, I didn't really get what I needed, because in my opinion, every firm would probably do better on a second round. everybody, if they got to do their presentation twice, could do better. Everybody would give a little bit better information when they understood more what you were looking for. And it seems to me that could we build that into this process in the future so that everyone starting out knew what that how that second round of interviews could get triggered. So we kind of take it out of this. It's just somebody's decision for the second round. And I also think, Madam City Attorney, I think if you're going to have a second round, it ought to look the same as the first round. I think the panel members need to be the same. I think if there was five
The
people,
the Lawa panel?
Yeah.
The Lawa panel was the same.
no, except for the airline executives. I think it should look the same. Otherwise, I think you've changed a variable that didn't occur in the first round. I think you need to keep everything as the same as possible so that the second round is just a little more transparent and pure in terms of the criteria. I know Ms. Grohl had a couple questions.
And I just think it goes to that. I think it is clear from what I've heard today that the request for a second round of interviews occurred. The request was during that first interview, there was a request to do that. It didn't come a few days later. It was part of what people talked about in that first round. And I think that's important to make clear here. It wasn't you all got together later and decided you want to do a second round of interviews. So, and I'll let you run. But I think when I was reading the report here, as you may recall, and this was before you got here, Gina Marie, but we changed some of the processes based on a controller audit that occurred several years ago. Although I was surprised to see that, and we considered it in our audits committee, this was a few years ago, I think before even you were elected, Jose, it was considered, and we thought, I thought it actually had gone through the full city council, but it sounds like it has not. But there were changes made by the airport authority, as well as I think the controller did follow-up audits and so forth to make some changes. And at that time, it was based on the commissioners were at least purported to be too involved in the process, and they were the ultimate decision makers, and it wasn't transparent. And there was concern raised at that time that the bureaucracy would take over because there was equal concern that bureaucracy, and this is not saying that this occurred in this process or any others, but that they have relationships and people they've been comfortable with and nothing improper about it, just it's been done this way. We're going to continue to do this way because that's an easier way. And so we were trying to find a balance between commissioners who were trying to say we want to look and do things differently, but we didn't want them to unduly influence and also not give the bureaucracy too much, and trying to find that fine line, which I think is what you're trying to do. And I think what both Mr. Wiesar and Ms. Hahn have mentioned is, are there points in here and some of the controller recommendations that have come forward, and there was Mayor Hahn had specific executive directives that said here are things that need to change, that possibly coming back, as Ms. Hahn alluded to, and both probably to both committees, which is here's some lessons learned, even though nothing, from the perspective was done incorrectly or improperly, but that maybe to just create more transparency. But it does sound like there was, in the RFP, it said there could be a second interview, and there is a lot of flexibility in that. And again, it may not be that they have odd feeling about it, but information comes to light. There is a question that someone thought I didn't ask that really would be critical. I mean, I know sometimes after I've interviewed a potential employee, I think of something later that, I should have asked that question. I'm not going to hire that person until I've asked that question. So part of the request coming back should be, are there things that could be more clear in the RFP or the transparent process, so there's no cloud or question in the future.
Right.
And even when we specify that, I'm sure there'll be cloud or question, because that's just the name of the game. And as you say, our roles are different.
And on that note, I think I'd like to bring the controller up at this point.
And Eric is on jury duty, so I'm going to go open the meeting. So.
As Ms. Gruhl just alluded to, why don't you give us a quick update on the audit and some of the recommendations? Have they been implemented? And do you see anything in this process that you think maybe going forward we could tighten up a bit to kind of remove this cloud of
Certainly. Good morning, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Rushmore Cervantes with the City Controller's Office. Late 2003, the Controller did an extensive audit of contracting practices at Lawa. Found a number of issues, a number of weaknesses in the transparency of the contracting processes. A number of recommendations were laid out for Lawa. There was a subsequent follow-up audit in 2005. There was a lot of progress that had been made, but still there were issues that had to be addressed. The Controller's Office has continued to follow up with Lawa, and as late as January of this year, we did a final review of a desktop review of their policies and procedures, and we were satisfied with all of their policies and procedures as it relates to procurement, personal service contracts. We were completely satisfied with what they had in place. Now, whether they're following those guidelines, that's a different matter, but as far as the proper policies and procedures, they had those in place. Let me fast forward a little bit for future. The mayor, the council, and the Controller's Office are mandated every 5 years to conduct an industrial, economic, and administrative study. We have hired a consultant, Cage Consulting, that's actually involved in this analysis right now, and they look at all aspects of operations of the proprietary departments. One of those aspects will be contracting. So moving forward, looking at contracting, there could be areas that we could look to enhance the contracting aspects as it relates to second interviews, third interviews. I've sat in interviews, panels myself, and there are times when you need subsequent interviews. You need to ask more questions. When we go in and look at, that is the Controller's Office looking at this current process, we're basically going to be looking at documentation. Did they follow the policies and procedures that are in place right now? So what we're going to find or won't find are documentation as to do they follow this. So moving forward with this IEA study and looking to enhance the policies and procedures, we may look at if you need to go from after the first interview to go to a second or a third, then the panel should document that as the reasons why. I mean, those simple
Do you think
things.
the panel should remain the same on the second round?
That's a possibility. That's a policy decision. It could change the viewpoints, if you will, if you don't have the same members there, even though they may not be voting. But again, those members that weren't there the second time around, that were there the first time, that weren't there the second time, weren't voting members. But it's really a policy matter. For transparency purposes, it probably help to have the same members there. But I think it really comes down to documentation. So I'm going to recommend to the administrative members of that are overseeing the IEA study with the consultant is that they look at the best practices and come up with maybe enhancing the documentation of the RFP process. And that maybe that will resolve any issues in the future, because if there's no documentation as to why you had the second interview, then that's going to lead to questions and maybe perhaps false misunderstandings.
Is the Controller's Office currently looking at this process, and if so, when will we see a
We're
final
doing an
product?
initial assessment right now. We've just begun, and essentially we're going to look at specifically just the transactions of the process of the two selections of the two contracts, nothing more, nothing less, and gather all data. We've recently obtained most of the data, and we're going to compare that to the current policies and procedures.
When's the
that are in place.
timeline for that?
We anticipate probably 3 weeks.
3 weeks.
And we'll have a better idea if there's anything there, if we need to move forward with that investigation or not.
Do you think there should be any more specific criteria on what would trigger a second interview? Do you think it's enough just to say someone needed more information?
I think that you really have to give department heads a little bit of latitude to ask further questions, to constrain them to meeting certain criteria in order to trigger second interview or third interview. I think that's a little too burdensome on the department heads. They're given a lot of responsibility, and they should feel comfortable, just like if you were interviewing somebody to work for you, sometimes you have second and follow-up interviews because you've thought of something
But
else.
now that we've had a precedent on two contracts,
Mhm.
two contracts, first round, one firm, second round seemed to flip to the other firm. Now that we have that precedent, why wouldn't any firm going into bid, if they didn't get a second round, if they were the loser, why wouldn't they feel like if they could have done better on the second interview? They could have brought in a different team. They had a bad day. They were off on the first round. If they had a chance for a second interview, they could have shown and been better. Do you see what I'm saying?
A little bit, but again, I go back to giving the department some latitude as far as what's going to trigger that second round of interviews. It's going to be different for each process. Each contract they're going to award, as they go through that process, the questions may be different, and that could trigger that second and third round of interviews.
Can I just ask a question, Russ? Well, you were a general manager for the city for how long?
3 years.
Did you ever have second interviews on anything?
Yes.
So it's a practice that general managers use?
It's common.
Okay, and over at the controller's office, do you have people, like the CAO has analysts that go out to departments? Is all of yours done by contract, or do you have actual people who do the audits who work out of City Hall East?
A combination of the two.
Combination of the two, but what's the percentage? For something like the sophistication of a harbor, an airport, water and power, do you usually go outside?
Yes.
Okay. So I just wanted the committee to understand that they often use resources to go outside the staffing that is allotted by the city to the controller's office. Thank you.
I have a committee member here who needs to go.
Because I've got to go to the council. They're calling for the quorum. From what I've heard, the process was in place. The process was followed.
Well, I don't know the process was followed. We know there was the procedures were in place that the controller's office accepted. What we're going to do is look at the data that we can gather from Lawa to ascertain whether they follow the policies, procedures. There may be gaps as far as not having documentation, but that's all we can go by.
What from Kelly Martin, the city attorney, explained, from my understanding, is that the process was in place. They followed the process. They asked for a second interview. I don't see anything wrong with a second interview that was conducted. What troubles me is that the airport, prior to the current general manager, has spent millions upon millions of dollars on architectural research. Okay. I think it's $100 million that they've spent. There's been no improvement. And I trust that someone in charge of that airport is going to move forward with making something happen. I'm suspicious of an anonymous letter that generates this particular hearing, the suspicion, the cloud upon the people at Lawa who are trying to do a job. So I'm satisfied that they're going to move forward. I know that the general manager has a good reputation when she came into this leadership of the airport, and I trust the people that that have testified to their candor and their truthfulness. I believe that the anonymous individual may have been prompted, and I see a number of individuals in this room that we never see at these type of hearings. It may be some other act that someone's trying to do.
These are all regulars.
Oh, no, they're not regulars. I mean, it's a standing room only, 845, a standing room only, and there's millions of dollars involved in this. So I want to see it move forward. If we don't have a general manager we don't trust, that's one issue. I do trust our general manager, and I know Mr. Ritchie and his reputation from Lawa. So I'm satisfied that they've done what they need to do. And if there's a second interview or a third interview to make sure it's right, we had a similar situation with a contract that we have out of the Personnel Committee, and it went through a number of reviews, and the initial selection wasn't made. It was another selection. We're very pleased with it because we need to do more research. So I've got to go down to council, but I want to make my comments. I think the general manager is a fine person, a fine representative, and thank you for the job you're doing, and I hate to see you on the hot seat. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I got to run to council.
Yeah,
I do support the general manager and the staff. Work hard, work fair, and work right.
Thank you.
I'd like information is knowledge is power.
Okay. Just to reiterate a few things, could I ask Gina Marie to come back up? I want to ask her one question. My bottom line is this. I've had 9 months watching the executive director like a hawk, because that is the airport in my district, and I take this very seriously. And I happen to come from the private sector, and I know you have to make decisions. And that's key to getting things done. First, if we do vote in favor of this before we go, I want it forthwith so you can get to work and start modernizing that airport. So as the executive director, you have to, in your way, which of course I agree and support, take leadership. So you see these firms, and then you get into the meeting there, and then you decide in your mind which is better for the city of Los Angeles and going forward with modernization. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So the firm you picked, why did you pick that firm over the other firm? Or why did you influence or say or have an opinion or jump into it?
I accepted the selection panel's recommendation and am moving forward with that to recommend that to the board.
Very good. Very good. Okay. That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Where are we going from here, Madam
Well,
Chair?
I think here's what, I mean, we've got some public
got some
comment
more
cards.
questions, but I wanna-
We got some public comment cards. I think what I would like to have is recommendations from the Controller's Office, the Ethics Commission, the City Attorney, on how to improve this process. I still feel, as we move forward, as we said, with, billions in modernization, which we all want to do, I don't want every time to have some criticism about how we do this. We want to do it right the first time. We don't want to bring these to this committee every time, but I just still feel like there's a couple places that, in my opinion, could be tightened up a bit.
Let me give you a timeline. With the IEA study, it should be released sometime mid to late July. So as far as improvements...
And that's where
best
you think
practices-
this is going to come from.
Well, that's where the improvements would come.
Okay.
Looking at the
Okay.
current contracting practices and ways to enhance it. And we will...
And one of the things I would like you to look at, Madam City Attorney, is the idea, because I think what cast the suspicion is the first round of scoring when when there's a second interview. I'm wondering if we do tighten this process up, if we're going to have a second round, why not just wait to the second round to do the scoring?
Because you may want to only interview a smaller number. You don't, if there are people, as there was in this process, where one clearly fell out from the bottom, you don't want to use up their time or the government's time in continuing them in a process that they have no hope in making it to the end in, because there's clear decisions. So you have to have opportunities for evaluations where people can fall out, and so but to your bigger point, I think we absolutely can step back and make clearer the process as it currently exists. We can describe it better on our RFPs. We can describe it better for you all and for the board and for everyone. That will only help the situation. I think that we can and do a better job of describing it. Absolutely.
Okay, good.
And another point I think we need to address somehow is in what event should a general manager sit in on the panels? For example, I buy your argument, because when I hire somebody in my office, my staff first does the first 2 rounds of interviews. Sometimes they say we feel very confident with the selection, and I say, fine, I'm not going to, you guys do it. Other times they say, bring them in, I want to meet them myself. And so I participate in that process. However, having been on the Board of Education for 4 years when we had a $16 billion program that involved a lot of construction management firms, I'm not sure if it was written policy, but I had often seen that a supervisor would never sit in on a panel because of the perception of undue influence, and so influence on their employees. So I'm not sure if that's something, I'm not saying that was right or wrong, I'm just saying that's something we should explore here to see if that needs to be addressed through our own policies. We may say we should leave it up to the discretion of the general manager, or I don't know what's the right path to take on that, but I think we should look at that as well.
Councilmember, that's a very important point that you have. On the one hand, the issue of undue influence. On the other hand, I would have a concern if particularly in cases where a general manager maybe knows one of the companies better. The one advantage to having the general manager sit in is that the general manager then hears all of the information themselves, as opposed to having it being filtered, and the questions get asked of everybody, and so everybody has the same opportunity to make their pitch, so to speak, to the general manager. So there's a balancing consideration.
Because
I'm identifying that as an issue to
true.
address. I'm not quite sure myself which direction.
I think that's right, because I think when we removed commissioners from the interview process because we said you can't sit in on an interview and then vote on the selection. I mean, that was part of why commissioners were removed. So you have now a general manager sitting in and clearly encouraging or stamp of approval on the firm. And I said, I don't know if that's right or wrong. but it might be something, the spirit of why we removed commissioners from the interview process.
I would just say, I mean, we can look and probably should look at all of everything that's been raised today. This is a balance.
Right.
It's a balance of interests.
Right.
And as a
Right.
commissioner,
Right.
I would want to think about everything that's been raised here, but I would have a concern because the commission is looking, as I said before, to the executive director. And
Right.
the executive director is the ultimate staff person responsible.
And accountable.
The ultimate staff person
Right.
responsible. So
Right.
to remove her
Right.
and then expect her to have the responsibility is an issue. So we can look at all of it, but I'm just saying
Right.
there needs to be some.
And then again,
balance
maybe
with
it's
this.
you sit in on every interview then. I'm just saying. I mean, that's one way to remove that.
Madam Chair, I do-
to address what you just said, that she hears all the information and it's not filtered for her.
Madam Chair, I do want to clarify for the public's sake, we've identified some issues that we
Right.
would like to look at in terms of policy that
Right.
this council does have purview over.
Right.
What are the next steps for that? Should we wait for the controller's review in
Well, again,
July, or
yeah.
should we convene these two committees to
Yeah, we'd like.
propose
I
some
mean, I think we'd
motions
like a
and
report back, and I don't know how that works. If the controller, the ethics, and the city attorney, you guys work together.
Be happy to
Yeah,
cooperate.
and then just come back and see if there is a way as we move forward to improve
I
this
think
process.
BOAC should be part of it as well.
You're
That's-
not talking about holding up the Fentress contract while this goes.
No.
No.
But I think, Mr. Rosenthal, these would be policies for citywide, not only for BOAC. So if we could
Right.
just look at this generally for all departments.
In a general sense, but
yeah.
I mean, we have commissions for a purpose, and the process that they go through is a process that they're responsible for in the transparency thing. When we have a problem with something, we bring it to us in that regard. And so I think on this particular issue, their experience in this process is critical toward coming up with some sensing of what we need to do.
Yeah, and again, I mean, I certainly think, and the Fentress contract, I believe we're going to take up in council on whether or not we have approved your decision or reject it. But I think today, I mean, I think we all want to reiterate the fact that we have great confidence in Gina Marie Lindsay. We were delighted that you were tapped to lead this agency, and that's, I don't think you are in any way coming under our criticism or indictment. It really, the more I look at this and the more I look into this, to me, it's just, I can see, looking at it from the outside, how this process could be tightened up a bit, so that as we move forward, everybody that bids on a contract knows the rules. It's very clear and transparent on what triggers a second interview, and that sometimes, and that the variables don't change. But what you do get different is just maybe some more information from those who are bidding on the contract. I've got some public cards, and do we want to give a time on that report back? Well, July. You said the controller won't have the report till July.
Correct.
Okay, so.
Those are only improvements. Again, we're going to do our assessment of what transpired here and probably have something, a better sense within about 3 weeks.
Okay, well, then how
Can we
about...
do like 4 weeks on the report back?
Right.
And
Can
on
we get
those
four
issues
weeks
identified?
on the report back from all of you on maybe some ways to improve this process as we go forward. Okay, I have Frank Clark, Christina Davis, Vanessa Rodriguez, and Arnold Sachs. Hi, Frank.
Morning. Frank Clark, Executive Director, Lax Tech Corporation, and for the councilman's benefit, Lax Tech Corporation is a not-for-profit that's been in existence since 1984, and we have 43 shareholders, which are all of the international airlines that serve Los Angeles. I would simply offer 2 comments on the discussion that has taken place this morning. I appreciate your opening comments. You've listened very well to our discussions over the last couple of years. All of the council, we appreciate that very much. I think the one thing that I would leave with you is you've spent a lot of time talking about process this morning, and I would simply, to the last part of this discussion, talk about timing and implementation and share with you, again, the great concern of my constituents, the international airline community. They are very concerned and continue to be concerned about the perception perceptions of this city. 10 years, $150 million spent in the evaluation of the modernization of this airport, and yet the only thing we have going forward, but fortunately, is the modernization of Tom Bradley. There is still, however, concern, and I have, within the last 2 weeks, received numerous phone calls from international airline executives from around the world wondering and expressing concern about a potential delay and reverting to patterns of the past where LAX gets very close to implementation of modernization but never quite seems to go that further distance. We absolutely respect the need for the process. I appreciate your opening comments. We're a major stakeholder. It will be our funds that will pay for a large part of these improvements. And so we absolutely respect the process. But I think to Commissioner Zifkin last comment, a very great concern that says you have before you two contracts that are integral to moving forward with the next stage of the modernization of the airport. We hope that is considered and decisions are made in an expeditious fashion. The second comment I would offer is that in the selection process for candidates, the mayor's office and the airport commissioners came to us in the airline community and asked for what leadership characteristics we saw as being important. We saw three very specific areas that we felt were necessary, and we would simply urge that you recognize that change is an important element as we go forward. There are a lot of very dedicated, hardworking, qualified employees at Lawa, yet at the same time we have an airport that in recent years, as J.D. Powers has ranked the top international airports in the world, as ranked 22 or 21 out of 23. And so clearly, I think that's something we all want to see as change. And with that are some new team members that can address customer service, financial modeling, and doing the construction of projects of this complexity.
Thank you. And let me just clarify. The DIM contract, everybody, is being implemented. They've actually been on the job now for 7 weeks or, yeah. So that one, there's no delay, none. It is, they've already been hired. They're in there. They're doing their job. So there's been absolutely no delay on DIM. The Fentress contract could not have been implemented anyway. You can't implement a contract until 5 council days after the awarding. So that's like today. So no delay on that. So, you know, I want to make that loud and clear to everyone who, and I've gotten the same calls that is accusing me of delaying and holding things up. That couldn't be farther from the truth. The DIM contract has not been delayed. We had some questions about it, but it is happening. They're working. That job's been doing. The Fentress contract could not have been implemented, as we know, by city charter until 5 council days after the action. So we're well within the time that the charter gives us to ask questions, to probe deeper on how these very, very expensive contracts are awarded in the city of Los Angeles. So far, there's been no delay.
They're not expensive. Every penny is worth it.
Right.
Good morning, Madam Chair and member of the committee. My name is Christina Davis, and I'm the president and CEO of the LAX Coastal Area Chamber of Commerce. And I've been asked today by the officers of our board to speak regarding our experience with Gina Marie Lindsay. As an organization representing over 650 businesses, most primarily located within 3 miles of LAX, you can imagine how important and concerned we are about the leadership at LAX, and most importantly, the character of that leadership. Gina Marie Lindsay, in her first year, has been before various community organizations, including our board, on a number of occasions. You only have to read the local newspapers to understand how delicate this relationship is between LAX and the surrounding community. The LAX Coastal Area Chamber of Commerce would like you to know that our experience, as well as what has been reported to us, is that Gina Marie Lindsay carries out her responsibilities as an executive director in a professional and ethical manner with graceful sincerity that's necessary to lead the 5th busiest airport in the world, which is surrounded by a residential and business community on 3 sides. We may not always agree with Ms. Lindsay, and we may have many issues on the horizon that we'll discuss with her. However, we always appreciate the manner in which she approaches us and deliberates with us. Gina Marie Lindsay's integrity and sincerity will work to everyone's benefit as LAX moves forward with its long overdue modernization program. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, Vanessa Rodriguez, Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce. And I know if Gary Tobin were here, he would also echo Mr. Clark's earlier comments. But for this morning, I'll be reading Gary's letter, which was submitted to your offices yesterday and provided a copy for you this morning on his behalf. On a letter dated May 6, Gary writes the following. Dear President Garcetti and members of the Los Angeles City Council, I'm writing in support of the Lawa Board of Airport Commissioners, headed up by Alan Rothenberg and Lawa Executive Director Gina Marie Lindsay. Together, and with your support, they have the ability to transform LAX into a world-class airport and to significantly increase traffic at our other regional airports. When Gina Marie Lindsay was the executive director of the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, she did what no one in Los Angeles has been able to do in 25 years. She successfully led a team of staff and commissioners in collaboration with the community and the airlines to create an airport for the future. Community leaders in Seattle and Tacoma speak of her work in glowing terms. And likewise, in Los Angeles, the business community has complete confidence in her ability and integrity. While it is clearly within the purview of Los Angeles City Council to place on your agenda the issues before you today, the Los Angeles business community urges you not to second-guess the judgment of the Lawa Board of Airport Commissioners or to micromanage the highly experienced executive director that you hired to lead the transformation of LAX and the growth of Lawa's regional airports. Under Gina Marie's leadership, we are on the verge of building an airport system of which all Angelinos and the region can be proud of. Sincerely, Gary Tobin, President and CEO, Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce.
Tell Gary it's called Section 245 in the city charter.
I versed him on
it's
that.
actually in there for, it's not considered second-guessing or micromanaging. It's called checks and balances, and it's our form of city government in Los
and
Angeles.
he thanks you for that.
Pass that on to him. Okay, then we have Arnold Sachs.
I'm right here, Madam Chair.
Oh, hi, Arnold.
Good morning.
I've got you for 3-4
Yeah,
public
that's
comments,
yeah,
so
same.
we're kind of pressed
Yeah,
for
no
time.
problem. Anyway, I was going to put some thoughts together. I sat at the library last night, and I started reading some newspapers. And the first one was when I went to the Airport Commission meeting, I took some information about it. It said, records show that on January 9th, the evaluation committee was heard. Then in yesterday's newspaper, it said, during a formal presentation before the committee on January 8th. So, you get stuff like that, who the hell you believe? Anyway, I have some questions. First of all, the three finalists for the project management team, was the general manager aware of that? If she was, I would imagine she would have excluded herself because of her previous work with one of the participants, which also makes me wonder why she didn't exclude herself from the second meeting, because she worked with one of the participants who is now working for a different company. And there's some kind of conflict of interest there, because when they had the airport commission meeting, a couple of the commissioners left because they had a bond hearing, and they left because there was a conflict of interest. So the conflict of interest arises here. I don't have any problem with the young lady. I think she does a great job. Basically, I'm here more because they're spending so much money and there's nothing being spent on transportation. That's my complaint. And every time they have a meeting, I go in and I bitch about it. But plus, I deal with the MTA, and this is a breath of fresh air. But there were questions. The first meeting was 1 day, and they voted. The second round of meetings was 2 days. So they didn't vote after the first day, they voted after the second day. So if the second round of meetings could be 2 days, why couldn't the first round of meetings be 2 days? Who knows? Why was a vote and then they decide for a second round of meeting? Doesn't make sense. There's a lot of questions. I like the idea that she came from an airport where they did the runway design during the litigation, unlike LAX where they're doing the litigation before the runway design, which who the hell knows when that's going to occur. I'm going to stop because you got to go to the meeting. But I got a lot more to say about this, but what the heck.
Well, if you'd like to submit your written comments, Arnold, we'll read them. Okay, thank you very much. Fellow Chair of...
There is one other thing.
Yes.
I did want to comment about the other contracts. I thought they were held up because at the hearing, Commissioner Patsouris from the DWP showed up and ripped the commissioner board, the Board of Commissions, because of the contract proposals, and it was the, what was the phrase he used? The usual suspects. And so after he got done ripping them for about 8 minutes, then they decided to hold the contracts over, which that's the reason I thought they held them.
No, they didn't. See, we even let
They still
other
got
commissioners from other departments come over and
even while that
and
one was
speak.
going underwater, no pun intended.
Thank you very much. Do you have any final comments?
No, thank you, Madam Chair, for hosting this today along with our Audits Committee. And I look forward to the recommendations that the different personnel will make to improve our policy procedures. There's always going to be issues like this, but we just got to make sure that we are as transparent and as we plug in as many holes as we can for future purposes.
And I think the reason is, as everyone has expressed, we've waited too long to modernize this airport. And we are ready to move forward, make this a first-class, world-class airport facility, and we want to make sure that the process that we are undertaking will be smooth and transparent and quick. I mean, we want to do this in an expedited way, so we want to put principles in place that allow us to do that as we move forward, because I think that's all of our goal. So, thank you.
Meeting adjourned.
Meeting adjourned. Bill got up on the right side of the wall. Those are Wendy's.